Good morning and welcome to Love Every Moment, coming to you today from Effingham, Indiana. Today's verse is Romans 12:3. For through the grace given to me, I say to everyone among you not to think more highly of himself than he ought to think, but to think so as to have sound judgment, as God has allotted to each a measure of faith. Now, Paul has been going through a progression here. In verse 1, which we covered over here, he said that we have to love him with a sacrificial love, loving him more than anyone else or anything else, so that God could have anything in our lives, and then we are left as empty vessels, emptied of our human loves. That leads to verse 2, which we covered over here. Then the Holy Spirit could come into our lives and run our lives, run the show, and that will result in a complete transformation, that we go beyond being human because we start to think like he thinks and love like he loves. We become more like God and less like humans. Now, next week, we're going to see that God has different roles for each person in the church, or a different plan for their lives, and one may not look the same as the other, so we should think soberly and have no highfalutin thoughts of ourselves that I might be a pastor, so I'm above everybody, or I'm on the worship team, I'm above everybody. No, in God's economy, a custodian is just as important as the pastor, and both require faith to fulfill that role. Which leads to the most important part of today's teaching, which is the very end of it, as God has allotted to each a measure of faith. That's interesting. God allots faith to us. We tend to think faith comes from us, right? But let's look at a couple of other scriptures to back this up. Ephesians 2:8. For by grace you have been saved through faith, and that not of yourselves. It is the gift of God. Even the faith is not of ourselves. It's God's gift to us. One more. How about Hebrews 12:2? Fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of faith. He's the beginning and end of our faith, and it doesn't come from us. So we have to get beyond what we believed as little children, that if I believe hard enough, I'll get that pony. And then we become Christians and say, well, if I have enough faith, God will do this thing. It's the same type of thinking. So what is faith? What is it on a practical basis? Yes, we can quote Hebrews 12 and say Hebrews 11, faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. That's perfectly true. And of course, we're praying to a God that we can't see with our physical eyes or hear with our physical ears, but faith knows that he is listening to us and having a relationship with us. But what about on a practical basis? I'm going to give this suggestion. Faith is that time when we are really trusting God so much that he can remove something from our lives. He can remove my diet or my RV, my sexuality, my politics, whatever he wants, and I'll be okay with it because I know he's running the show. And that's acting on faith. So in a church setting, let's say, for example, his role for me might be, I want you to sell your house and move to Guatemala and be a missionary for 40 years. Well, that's going to take more faith than if I stayed in America and just worked a 9-to-5 job and went to church on Sunday. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but if that's God's role, he's going to have to give me more faith, and I'm going to need that to get through what's required of being a missionary in Guatemala. There's no bragging in it. It's just what God is doing. So all we need, according to Matthew 13, is a little mustard seed of faith, and knowing, just surrendering is really our job. And then he's going to lead the rest, and we are going to be along for the best ride of our lives. So let's exercise our faith by loving him more than anyone else or anything else, because if we love every moment, we're going to love every moment. I'm your average wretch, and I hope you have a great week.